descriptive statistics we are going to look at is dispersion. There are different ways we can measure dispersion, and in here we're going to look at 5 different methods. The first one is to find the range of your data set to understand the dispersion of the data set. So the range is the difference between largest and smallest values in a given data set. So we can use maximum minus minimum to calculate the range. The second type is variance. So variance is the deviation of all the data points in a given data set from the mean. So we calculate the average of the squared difference from the mean. So in here, there are 2 calculations as you can see in the slide. The first one is to calculate the sample variance, and the second one is to calculate the population variance. The only difference in here is that for the sample variance calculation, we're using n-1. The reason for that is because sometimes we feel like we are lacking some information from the sample, which might not represent population very well. So to compensate that difference, we will use an n-1 in here. I'm pretty sure you have already covered that in statistics class. But anyway, I'm going to do a quick recap in here. So the third type is standard deviation, which is the square root of the variance. So basically, you just take a square root of the variance you have calculated in the previous step. The fourth type is mean absolute deviation, which is the average of the absolute value of the difference between each data point and the mean. So the most commonly used one is actually standard deviation when we're trying to describe this dispersion. The last one is to create a box plot. Actually, the box plot can illustrate both the centrality and the dispersion. So here is an example of a box plot. So in this box plot, you can find the mean. You can also find each quartile of your variable. So a quartile is a quarter of the number of data points given in a data set. And as you can see, there are 4 quartiles in here. And this is your mean, this is your median. So this is the upper quartile, this is the max. And in this visualization, we can also see the outliers being identified in your data set. So outlier, they're larger or smaller than 1.5 times of the So the outliers is either smaller than 1.5 times the lower quartile or larger than 1.5 times the upper quartile. So now let's take a look at how we can calculate the dispersion in R. So what we'll do in here is that first we will take a look at the range. So we are still using the height as our example in here. So to calculate the range, we'll be using the maximum of the height minus the minimum of the height, and this is going to be 82. And for sample variance, we can use the default function in R, which is var, that tells you the variance. So we can simply calculate the R, calculate the var, and this is going to be 279.564. This is the sample variance. So now, one thing to note is that R's default variance calculation is for your sample variance. If you're trying to do like a population variance, then what you can do is that you could create your own code to do that. You can either calculate it by definition, or you can use math equation to do it. So if you calculate it by definition, this result will be 200. It will be like 226 something. So if you do this by math calculation, you can actually try to calculate the population variance based on the sample variance in here. So if you do that, it will give you the same result. Now for standard deviation, this is also pretty straightforward. So you can either do the standard deviation function here, or you could take a square root of the variance. So either way, it will give you the same result, which is 16.72. For the mean absolute deviation, we also have a default function here that can help you calculate this dispersion measure. So if you do MAD, which is mean absolute deviation, this will give you the result of 16.3. So now the last thing I want to show you is the box plot. So again, box plot is also pretty simple. It has a default function that can help you plot this box plot. So if you do a box plot for the height, you can see here is the box plot. So to make it more informative, we can add some text to explain what are these different parts. So we can basically add label to this box plot. So we can include the statistics in here as a label. So now this will tell you that the first quartile is 123, and the median is 161, and etc. So this is pretty much about the dispersion measures.